Welcome to Hispanic Biz Success Stories. We interview successful entrepreneurs to learn from them their story, how they built a business, how they overcame their challenges. Hope that this is an entertaining program for you. Thank you for watching. Today we have a very special guest with us, a good friend, Mr. Mike Rosales of State Farm. Mr. Rosales, thank you so much for being with us.
Homero, it's a pleasure being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Rosales, Mike, how long have you been with State Farm?
I've been with State Farm since April 1st of 1971.
Wow, so that's how many years?
The last count was 46.
46 years. What's the secret to your longevity?
The secret is learning to be adaptable, having that spirit of never giving up. Never giving up. In the course of time, the world changes and there's always obstacles. I've always had this in my mind that with adversity you build character, and that character will help you through any additional adversities. And from my perspective, if you're doing real well, fine and good. But the world, the way I view it, is it's like a ball. It's turning, and someday you may find yourself on top of it, and because of circumstances, because of events, you may find yourself the next day on the bottom. And so consequently, you have to have that fortitude, that ability to be adaptable, to understand that there's always challenges to be overcome.
Well, you certainly have overcome some. So we'll get into the story here. Mike and I have run around in different circles at the same time.
Yes, we have.
I've known Mike since high school, and you were a musician.
I learned to play clarinet.
Okay.
And then subsequently I transitioned to alto saxophone.
And we both delivered newspapers.
And we both delivered newspapers.
And you lived a little bit in my neighborhood.
Yes.
You grew up. What neighborhood you grew up in?
I lived on Virginia and Missouri.
Oh, okay.
Right straight down from El Paso High School.
And you went to Moorhead and then El Paso High.
We went to Moorhead and then eventually went on to El Paso High School.
How many brothers and sisters?
One brother.
Okay. And I understand he's a medical doctor.
My brother graduated also from El Paso High, and then graduated from UTEP, and was fortunate, and because of his hard work, qualified and was accepted to Stanford Medical School. And he did his preliminary work at Stanford, and then eventually did all his other work at UCLA, and became a board-certified OBGYN doctor.
And where does he practice now?
He practices out of Long Beach, California.
Okay, how nice.
And it's something that he loved to do, and he still loves doing it.
Yeah. And you, you grew up working like all of us did in those days. Tell me about your parents. What was your father like?
My father was actually born in Mioki, Chihuahua. Excuse me. My mother was born in El Paso. My father got here and lived on Park Street, right by the old Bowie High School grounds. And he went as far as, if I remember correctly, approximately either a sophomore or junior year at Bowie High School. And then he, through circumstances of those times, he got a position or a job at Southern Pacific. And he worked as a carman for, I believe, 47 or 48
Wow.
years. Yeah.
Wow.
My mother, on the other hand, was the oldest of her group of brothers and sisters, and very tragic situation where her mom passed away. My grandmother passed away in childbirth, and so my mom kind of, in many ways, took charge of the younger sisters, and it was during the Depression, and she had a very rough road that she had to toe. And so she only, if I remember correctly, she only went to about the 6th grade there in South El Paso.
Oh. And what did your mother do? Did she work too?
From there, she was old enough to get hired at J.C. Penney's at the corner of San Antonio and Stanton, I believe it is. Yeah. And I got to say this for my mother. My mother was a very creative person. In years, I believe, 1954, 55, she led the nation in sales. She works in the work clothes department. And so, but she was just it was amazing to see that woman work.
Wow.
Tremendous.
Well, for years, that JCPenney store was the highest volume store in the nation per square foot or something.
We had the pleasure, or she had the pleasure of having Mr. Penny track it down to El Paso twice.
Really?
To meet her,
Wow.
to have lunch with her. And it was a big honor. And you know, when we were young and you don't understand those things, but as I grew up, understanding what she had accomplished, it was quite an honor.
Sure.
Yeah, quite a success story on her behalf.
Wow, that's amazing. So, what did you learn from your mom and dad?
Well, first, and most importantly, is the work ethic. If you're given a chore, if you're given a piece, don't ever shy away from it. Meet your responsibilities, do it correctly, do it right, and if you do it right the first time, you don't have to do it again. And I think that's probably one of the biggest things I ever learned from them. You never give up.
Oh. So that's deep in your psyche.
Absolutely.
And so, what year did you finish high school?
I left El Paso. I graduated from El Paso in 1961.
Okay, and then?
Well, all during the time that I went to El Paso High, I was the typical teenager, pretty much liked to be around my friends and what have you. And so when I graduated from El Paso High, I was not prepared to undergo the rigors of college. And so, but I didn't know that. So I could not find work, and the only place that would employ me was a company in South Campbell and 6th Street, and it was unloading semi-trailers. And we would do approximately maybe 3 semi-trailers a day. And the hours at times on Monday and Thursday were at 5 o'clock until we finished. Could be 6 o'clock, could be 7 o'clock, whatever. And this is where the work ethic, where the commitment, and you never give up. And towards the end of the summer, I came to the conclusion there's got to be a better way. And so I elected to enroll at Texas Western then. And then I found out how lack of preparation, that I was confronted with quite a bit of challenges scholastically.
Wow. But you stayed with it and you finished.
I think the more obstacles I had, the more determined I was that I was going to get a degree. I was going to get a degree because I felt as I evolved and became a little bit more mature that if I didn't prepare myself, I would have a very difficult life ahead of me.
Yeah. So what year did you finish and what degree did you get?
Well, I completed my requirements 1966 as a Bachelor of Business Administration.
Okay.
And that subsequently that year, it's a very traumatic year for me, year I'll never forget. I met my wife and we got married in April. I completed all my requirements in August. I was drafted in the 1st of August, and I was a father in December 24th of 1966.
Wow, wow.
Our daughter was born about 2.5 months premature.
Wow.
And those are things, these are obstacles that you're confronted with, and you have to address them and learn to live accordingly.
Yeah. Wow. And so well, that's when the Miners won the national championship.
Oh, I forgot about that one. Yeah, in spite of all that, the Miners did win the NCAA.
So you married then. So how many children do you have?
We were fortunate enough to have 5.
Wow.
5 children. It was Lorraine, Michael Robert, Ana Maria, Andy, Carlos Andres, and Margaret Rosales.
Wow. Fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, that's good. And you have grandchildren now?
And we have one granddaughter, Erica, and we have 3 grandsons.
Fantastic.
And we have 3 great-granddaughters.
Wow, that's fantastic. Yeah. Wow, so your hands are full.
All the time.
So before we get into the State Farm thing, right after you finished college, you got drafted.
Right there.
So what was your duty in the military?
Well, I went in like the millions of us that were drafted. And married, there's certain obligations. I was hoping to get my basic training here at Fort Bliss, and for whatever reason, I and two others were sent to Fort Dix, New Jersey. And while I was there at Fort Dix, I experienced 2 months of pay, and the pay was exceptionally low. And I don't mind saying this publicly, I would earn $35 a month. My wife would get the allotment, but it was not a lot of money. So while I was there, I had the opportunity of considering going to officer candidate school, and which I did. And I went on to get my basic training, and then we were sent to the infantry school, and I was infantry qualified. And then I went to OCS for 6 months.
Okay. So you served as an officer for how long?
Well, I got commissioned in July 12th of 1967, and then I had my first assignment at Fort Sill, Oklahoma, with the 3rd Corps Artillery Group, and spent a year there. And I learned tremendous amount of experience I gained there.
What did the military do for you?
Well, for those of us that have gone through the military was probably the most eye-opening experience that I ever had. Going in, I didn't have the self-confidence, and as I got in and I went through the courses, I found out that I was really not as what my friends used to call me. You can't make it. I found out that I was very capable of being anywhere from the 10%, 15%, 20% of my classes. So it helped me with my self-esteem. And during the course of time that I was at Fort Sill, I was given two projects by the Chief of Staff there. And again, sometimes when you don't know any better, you work harder. And in those two instances, we were able to organize. One was a program that the Chief of Staff wanted, and we came out #1 in the Army. The unit did, and that they were ecstatic at the fact of that. And then the other was during that time there was a lot of tension. This is the aftermath of Compton and what have you. So out of that unit, we had 2,000 riot control personnel, always in training, and I did march movements for them. And unfortunately, the day that Dr. Martin Luther King was assassinated, our unit was activated and was sent to Washington, D.C., along with the Marines and I believe the 82nd Airborne. And we were in reserve because the president elected to put the National Guard on the streets.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. And you also served in Vietnam.
Then from there, I went on to Vietnam and spent a year in Vietnam.
Okay. So you come out of the service in what year?
I came out of the service in 1970, in July of 1970.
And so now you've got, your military back behind you. You've got a family.
We've got our daughter, and I honestly, at that point in my life, I thought that there wasn't anything I could not do. I was ready to change the world, like many of us when we were young. And so I came to El Paso and had preliminarily made arrangements to go to work for a company here. And through fate, I went directly to the owner, and he asked me to take 2 more weeks. Well, I had already taken 4 years of my life through the military, and I was very eager to get in the flow of things, so to speak. That day, and it's all driven by the man upstairs, I met a friend of mine who introduced me to his boss, which was Don Henderson, who eventually became mayor of El Paso. And so I went and interviewed, and they offered me a position. And so I told my wife, "What do you think?" And she said, "Well, if you want to do it, let's do it." My thrust at that point, my main thrust was that I was going to live in California. That's where I wanted to go live. And the offer was good, and so I said, well, maybe I'll give it a try. So I went to work for Don Henderson, and he had a gentleman by the name of Chuck Luciano as assistant. And I learned so much in 6 months from those two gentlemen that it served as a tremendous training ground, because it seemed like the minute I went to work for them, State Farm started calling me. And initially, I didn't want to have anything to do with State Farm. But eventually, I felt that there was a lot more opportunity, marketing-wise, with State Farm, so I went ahead and made the switch.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, right away. Well, tremendous mentors, Don Henderson.
I see him every once in a while, and I give thanks to the Lord, first of all, Don Henderson, Chuck Luciano, and the guy that brought me into State Farm, a gentleman by the name of Marshall St. John.
Oh, yes, yes.
If Marshall hadn't given me the opportunity, I don't know where I'd been, where I would have gone.
Well, great people.
Yeah, tremendous.
And so, tell me a little about your wife.
Well, Cecilia graduated from the rival high school, Austin High School. How we got together, it's something that the Lord puts you in front, and we got married, and at that time, like so many couples at that time, we didn't have a whole bunch of resources, but we got married, and she was going to nursing school, and she completed her RN requirements the same year, August 31st, I believe, of 1966. And then went on to work in the hospital at Beaumont and various hospitals. And when I finally was in the process of developing my agency, she came and helped me for about 11 years.
Wow.
So I gotta give her a tremendous credit.
So how many years have you been married now?
We've been married 51.
Oh, and you know that,
51
right?
years.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
Well, let me ask you now, so you get into insurance. Now, insurance, you weren't a kid thinking, I want to sell insurance.
Oh, absolutely not. I had no earthly idea. I had no idea, honestly.
Well, at that time, there weren't too many Hispanics in insurance.
No.
Because my uncle was in insurance, and I know the difficult. He was successful at it, and I grew up with Eddie Mopel, and his father was in insurance. And not too many
Very few, yes.
but they were successful. My uncle was successful. What was that like for you? Was that a challenge right away?
I go back, at that time in my life, I was 27 years old. I had a lot of spirit, which I still do, but I had a lot of commitment to achieve and do things. And so it was difficult because oftentimes on weekends, instead of having the opportunity to be around, I'd sit down and start making phone calls, cold calls, and people I never met. And you would think that people would hang up on you, and there were a few hang-ups, but by and large there weren't. And this is the way this career developed.
So you weren't afraid of making cold calls?
I wasn't afraid. One thing that sometimes we fail to understand, that rejection is the first step of eventually getting that acceptance. So the more rejections you get, the closer you are to get that home run, if you will.
Yeah.
And it's a matter of mindset, if you will.
So did you find success right away, or did it take a while?
No, it took a while because State Farm, when I came on, had 2 years prior had some underwriting issues with profitability, and so when I came on in '71, they had programs where we could not just outright bind coverage. So I would have to take an application, send it by mail to Austin, then they would send it back, and oftentimes when I got the approval, the people had already gone to another company. So my numbers were not there. However, since the training that I received with Don Henderson was so basic and so profound, I was able to survive through I would pivot onto life insurance. And I look at myself now, and I still have records that was really my salvation in the survival part.
Well, that is still a staple of the insurance companies, the life insurance.
The life insurance, but oftentimes in life insurance you get so much rejection that as a newcomers, they rather have someone continuously say yes, let's do it, as opposed to saying, well, I'm not ready, or I'm not interested, or whatever it might be the case. Yeah, and so that's.
So you already picked up a financial education selling insurance, and
You know, selling insurance is like getting a degree, because the people that you come across, the service that you're providing. I've always viewed insurance as something that a service that I'm providing for the individual. And even at my age, at 73, the reason I am not ready to retire is that I still get, I still enjoy helping people at the time of need, honestly.
but you've seen a lot of people come into insurance and not and drop out.
Yes, yes, yes.
It's not an easy industry to survive in.
No, it's not. The people that have come to me and said, well, how did you do it? What have you? I always tell them this. This business is not a sprint. This business is a career. And if you're coming in here with the strictly thought that you're going to make gobs of money immediately, go find someplace else to go get a career, because it's going to take some time.
So when did you realize it was a career and not a job?
Honestly, very early, very early. I saw this thing as a career. I saw a tremendous opportunity.
So did you develop a strategy?
My strategy is I would create a yearly goal. I would create a 3-year plan. This is what I want to do this year. This is where I want to be in 3 years. This is what I want to be in 5 years. Because you got to understand one thing. At that stage of my life, I'm 27. I've gotten out of the Army. I was very fortunate in getting extremely good ratings, efficiency ratings in the Army, and so I had a lot of aspirations of doing things, maybe getting into real estate in addition to, or maybe doing some other things. But things don't happen unless you're organized, unless you have a plan.
So where'd you get the drive from?
I think it was a combination of my mother. I think it was a combination of my father. My father was not a typical, not typical, but he was not the type of individual that would deviate from his responsibilities. If he get paid, my dad would bring the check to my mom, and they'd work together. And so you learn what the backbone is supposed to look like. My mother had that drive. My mother had a tremendous drive, and again, partly is that she was brought up without a mother and a father, and the depression, tremendous stress that she learned to live with at a very young age.
Well, I met you again. I mean, I'd known you earlier, and then I came back to El Paso in '85, and I met you. You'd already built a successful agency by then.
Well, I was working on it. Yeah, I was working on it. Yeah,
we got to become. I worked at the chamber with the Minority Business Council, and you were a member of that.
Yes.
And through that, you were one of the groups that went and helped form the Hispanic Chamber. What was that like?
Well, if you recall, the Hispanic Chamber, well, there had been attempts to create a Hispanic Chamber before, and for whatever the reasons, they didn't happen. And so there was a core group of us that were in the Minority Business Council, and while we were there, we couldn't understand this minority portion, and so there were some issues that arose while we were there, and so we undertook the task of looking into creating our own chamber here in El Paso. And one of the people that was involved was a gentleman by the name of Dan Sotomayor. And Dan went as far out as Albuquerque at that time, and Albuquerque had their Hispanic Chamber, and brought all the materials, the information, and as we communicated with them, then we found out that they wanted to be part of El Paso. And it dawned on me, if Albuquerque is established and we don't have a chamber, and yet they want to be partnering with us, then we have a gold mine here. We have a tremendous gold mine. And it's not so much, and it was not so much us against the greater chamber. It was just something that among the Latino group here in El Paso, we needed to have some form of a venue where the small business could go to and get the assistance that a small business entrepreneur sometimes needs as he gets going.
Did the Minority Business Council serve any purpose?
Yeah, it certainly served a big purpose because the more we got into it, the more we understood that we were going to get this thing done. And we were able to be inclusive enough to bring females into the board, which is to me something that needed to have been done prior to. And this once you get the inclusiveness, well, then you have this power building up. The people begin to understand that we're no special interest. This is not for me. This is for the entire community.
So there was a need for Hispanic businesses to get together.
Yes, sir. Very much so.
And to have advocacy.
Yes, very much so.
And so, so what did that do for you in your business?
Well, and that's a good question. In everything that I've ever been involved in, I've never really looked at it from that perspective. I did it because I felt so strong that there was a need in creating those things. And if I did get any business, I never measured it that way. I never did. And maybe I see it, I have no reservations about that because of my commitment to get things done.
So you've been community oriented?
I joined some of the Latino organizations. During the time that I was part of LULAC, I served in I was also an officer in the Council 8, and we undertook some projects with distribution of shoes through one of the members during Christmas for various parts of the community, from Fabens all the way to Anthony, if you will. Always wanting to give part of something back to this great community.
Well, I remember at that time you had a pretty nice business. You had just built a building, didn't you, on Montwood?
Yeah. I was fortunate enough to acquire a piece of land, and we finally were able to put the building, and it's still there. It's about 5,000 square feet, and which I thank God I still own, and it's fully rented, thank God. But I had just moved into it, and the debt service was difficult. It was not something that was difficult.
But you got through that.
Yeah, we got through that. Right after that happened, State Farm came to me and asked me if I would consider going into their management program. And my response initially was, well, I'm just barely getting this ship on the road, and I don't know if I really want to do this right now. And they came back several times, and they put a package together, and then I elected to go ahead and take their offer.
Wow, that's yeah. I remember that you became then a district manager.
It was an agency management position.
Okay.
And so I handled about 20 agents or 21 agents in various locations of El Paso.
Wow.
But keep in mind that as a manager in that system, we were not direct bosses of our agents, because they're all independently agents. We were more of a coordinating body. Programs come out, or if they had problems, we're there to help or address issues that might come up. That was a philosophy of the company at that point.
So you had to leave your insurance business. Now, you'd built up your insurance business before that. How many years?
It was actually 16 years.
16 years.
16 years.
And so, what year was that you?
If I'm not correctly mistaken, it was 1988.
88. Okay. So you become agency manager, and so, what did that do for you and your business? Because you're back running your agency again.
Yes. During that time, then again, I was given the opportunity to work with these agents, and which I did, and things were moving along, and things were going well, and in about, I believe, 7 years into the career, then the company reconfigured the leadership. And so I was offered a position as a consultant, and I spent 8 years as a consultant with State Farm. And in that duration of time, as a consultant, even though I was based in El Paso and I worked with the agents here, it gave me an opportunity to do certain projects for State Farm outside of the city. And in I believe the year must have been 2000, I was given the chore and the opportunity to go into the Metroplex and promote State Farm to the Latino market and the Latino market with State Farm. And so when I got there, then I begun to understand that we needed a lot of work in that market area. And I was able to get engaged into the recruitment part. I was able to also get into a little bit more extensive advertising, the Hispanic advertising, because the company was going through this change, and we had not made these changes until that particular time. And so I went in there, and it was quite an eye-opening experience.
So how many years did it take for State Farm to identify and recognize the Latino market?
Well, had already become aware and very attuned to it. Is that they wanted to do it in such a way where it was a transitional move, where we could get the biggest advantage, so to speak, with the dollars that we had to expand. Yeah, they saw the numbers.
So how many years were you with State Farm Management then?
I spent a total of 15 years.
So you had 16 years in your practice, then 15 years with State Farm Management, working with agencies. And then after those years with management,
I elected to go back to being an agent.
You did.
Going back to the entrepreneurial spirit. That's been the guiding light, if you will, the entrepreneurial spirit. Get up in the morning, and I say this publicly, I get up in the morning and in preparation to getting ready, it's just like I'm rejuicing myself, like I'm going on stage again. And it's been that way all my life.
So you go back into small business, private practice as a State Farm agent and build your business again.
Well, they were very gracious in the fact that they did give me a book of business to work with. Okay. So it was not quite like the first time.
Okay.
But by the same token, I also had the opportunity of managing a larger book of business. And it requires a lot more different changes, if you will. You have to have the right personnel.
Okay.
You have to have the right mentality of personnel. You have to have the right attitude of personnel. And the personnel have to come and work in the same mindset that you are.
So how do you accomplish that?
Very simple. Keep things in perspective. Don't try and overload yourself. Just take care of the people that you have. If you take care of the people that you have will ultimately refer you business. If we were to get a referral, and I say that, and I often preach this, if we were to get a referral out of every client that we have, we'd be twice the size, which would require I'd have to hire more people. But that's nothing bad. It's just something that we have to stay right on top of things, because we're in here to provide a service. We're in here to provide a service at the time of need. So we have to make sure that when something happens, we're attentive to. And I make it sound very easy. It's sometimes there are some glitches. Sometimes people during the course of time do not review their policies. Something happens, they forgot they have a deductible, or maybe the loss is just right above their deductible. They're unhappy. And so we have to come back and explain. Now, they're not unhappy if the loss is $10,000 or $12,000 or $15,000 or $30,000 above their deductible. It's when their deductible is such, and we're only going to pay, dollars above that. But like I tell my staff, we're here to service our contracts. It's not a matter of whether we like to or whether we don't. It's a matter of doing whatever the contract is. And I know that's State Farm's philosophy too.
So how big a staff do you have now?
I have 4 full-time, and I've got 3 part-time.
So you're a pretty large agency.
Yes, and the reason that I have as many people as I have is that the minute that the phone rings, I am very adamant about I want service to be provided. And as I'm doing this program here, I'm very confident if something happened right at this moment, my staff is taking care of it.
But you've also been community oriented. You know, we talked a little bit about being involved with the Minority Business Council, and you were part of that group that went and formed the Hispanic Chamber. And you were sharing a little bit about your motivation for that. It wasn't for personal gain.
Never.
It was for...
I think if you're given the opportunity, like I was, and so many of us have been, if you don't go back and give to the community, you're missing out on the sole purpose of you being given that opportunity.
Well, now you know you've got a very busy elected office. You won election to the Salado School Board, but that's something you've been doing.
Well, and I say this publicly, I heard about the bond issue that the Salado was putting together in, I believe, early 2015 or 2014, and I couldn't understand why there was so much money needed. Keep in mind that all my career has been in State Farm, and never in the school. And so I got into it, and then I got some people that called me and asked me if I would consider running for school board. And I'd be very frank with you. Initially, I said no, because this is a very it can be quite demanding, and I think the part that many of us fear is the politics involved. And I think that is what keeps people away. But the fact remains is that certain individuals asked me, they offered to help me, and then as I announced, I had to go back on the streets. Well, when I went back to the streets, it was like I was going back to State Farm, knocking on doors, talking to people, and finding out, getting the temperature of how the people felt. And I was fortunate enough to get elected, and so I went in year 2015. And when I went in there, the bond that was proposed failed. It was for $451 million. And honestly, I thought it was a lot of money. Well, what we did, we put this thing together through the Jacobs Group, gave us the priorities, and so we brought in the community and have the community analyze the needs of the district. Well, the number went from 451 to 431 to 430 million, 0.5. It's still a large amount of money. So as we there was myself and another new board member, we got into it. The more I dug into it, the more I began to understand and like the fact that I was there for a purpose. And the purpose is very simple. How do we provide the best learning experience for our children in Isleta?
Let me ask you, one of the issues, and I've seen it over the years with business people who get involved, they can get caught up in the elected office,
Yeah.
and lose sight of their business, or you know, they have to focus on the business and can't give the time. How important is that balance, and how did you find it?
I give you that's good. Again, good question. I get up early in the morning now, and this is because I've gotten older, of course. But I get up early in the morning, and I like to do certain things around the house. But then my office opens at 9. Now, in the event that I have meetings at 7:30 or at 8 or 9, whatever it might be, then I'm all ready to go. The minute I'm finished, I'm back at the office. It could be 9:30, it could be 10 o'clock, it could be 12 o'clock. But once I get in the office, I don't leave until 6:30, or whatever the time requires. So you have to have that balance. Now, oftentimes, that's the schedule. Well, then I may have a meeting at 7. So my day does not end at 6. My day may end at 8:30. My day may end at 9 o'clock. And that's part of my commitment to the community.
So how do you balance home life, elective office, and business?
I guess I'm conditioned to the fact that I in years when I was young, I worked late every day, every day. So you have to have a balance. Like my wife and I, oftentimes if I don't have a meeting, I'll get home at 6 or 6:15 or whatever. And since it's she and I, you know, you want to go somewhere. You want to go eat somewhere, you know, that kind of thing. And it kind of also gets me away from the stress. The other thing that I do in the morning is I work in the yard, and that's to me is very stress releasing. I go out I go out with the dogs and clean up the backyard, and it just really releases me of the tensions.
So as public service, what has it done for you personally, not just for your business, but for you personally?
I think in the 2 years that I've been in public service, it has given me a better perspective of how this community's needs need to be addressed, how I as an individual have to look at things in a more open, a more inclusive manner. Since I've been on this position, it's easy to criticize what was not done. So my philosophy is, while I'm here, I want to make the best decisions that will allow us an impact into the future. Whether it's 5 years or 10 years, whatever it might be, I'm not going to be here. I'm not a career politician, meaning I'm not in, I go to these board meetings in various places from different parts of the state, and again, it's not a put down on them, but oftentimes I run into people that have been in the boards for 20 years, 25 years. Well, that's not my cup of tea. My cup of tea is coming in here, getting our district, getting our community in a position where we can offer opportunity for this community in such a way where we have a well-rounded, educated workforce, where we can eventually attract quality employment. Quality employment means a lot if you look in terms of taxation. We, unfortunately, in this community are strapped with residential taxation. Well, every time we need something, well, we have to turn around and go to the taxpayer. Oftentimes, not oftentimes, but if you look at cities such as Austin or Dallas or Houston, it's the reverse. They've got this tremendous commercial base for taxes, and their residential taxes are much lower.
Yeah.
And so that's something that I may not be able to change it, but I want to have an impact.
Let me ask you, Mike, and I want to remind our viewers we're interviewing and talking with Mike Rosales of Mike Rosales State Farm.
Mm-hmm.
And you went back in and after you built your practice, you did corporate work for 15 years, 16 years, and now you're back building your practice. Are you building your practice now, or are you maintaining your practice?
When you're competitive, you're always building. I'm not building at the clip that I'd love to, but by the same token, I don't want to, I guess I go back to, this is not a sprint. This is a career. So if I grow, I want to grow correctly. I'm not into putting numbers.
So how do you grow correctly?
Well, you're selective. You do business with people that are honest. The world has changed. The world has changed big time. The values have changed. People will come and want to get things done, and they figure out things way. You know, oftentimes I've been sitting around for 46 years doing this State Farm business, and darn it, if I'm not confronted with some angle that somebody thought about just to secure funds for something that they didn't have so that we can pay for it, you know, and so you have to be right on top of things. And sometimes I've had to tell people it's better that you find insurance elsewhere, because I'm not here to play games. I'm not here to jeopardize any kind of contracts or jeopardize State Farm's position at all.
Why is that important to you?
Because you have to have integrity. You have to have honesty. I have to be honest with you. I have to be honest with State Farm.
Why?
Because that's the way it has to be.
Why does it have to be that way?
Because if you don't, then you begin to see the disintegration, the erosion of this country. It's very simple. You could write books and everybody is an expert in all that. It's real simple. The fact is, if you're honest, It's better to be honest and lose a piece of business than to cheat and say and tell lies, because ultimately it's going to come back.
Have you seen that? Have you seen the result of lack of integrity?
Yes.
What is the result of lack of integrity?
Well, in our business, if you for example have a trend of submitting business and not putting the proper information, then you're going to acquire a group of people that are there for one simple reason, to take advantage of that contract. And initially, you have no business taking them in. And it's a very general response, but you just have to keep, in my estimation, in my point of view, be honest, be direct, have the integrity.
So you build you're selective.
I am, yes.
And why is that important?
Well, if you're not selective, what you do also, let's presuppose that we brought in 3 times as much business, but in doing so, we did it in such a way where we're not selective. Well, that puts a lot of burden on my staff. I spend a lot of money on my staff monthly, and there's no need for us to bring in additional burden, because oftentimes these people that want a free ride are not going to stay with you. They come in here for their reasons, and then they'll leave. And I've experienced it over and over and over again.
So if I was to ask you, are you after the dollar?
No.
What are you after?
I think I guess the same philosophy that I had first. How do I help people? How do I make things better? We have a major loss, for example, a house. We've had houses burned down to the ground. How can we step in there and help people in that time of drama, or the trauma, shall I say? You walk into your home and it gets flooded, and you're sitting here and you walk in. Believe me, that's a lot of trauma at 7 or 8:30 at night, or your house burns down. I want them to feel that they can call. If our office is closed, State Farm has got 24-hour service. Tomorrow morning they'll call me. We've got it through the computer. So, Homero, I had a loss. Our people will immediately be with you. Now, I make a point from time to time that I personally will go out to your home. I'm one of those old doctors that still make house calls. I do.
Well, I was talking to my wife about it, because you were her father's agent, my father-in-law, and she said, yeah, he used to come to the house.
Yeah, I still do.
So that was.
I tell you what, I still have people that are able to. Well, they still have their home and they still have their car, but they don't drive as much. And traffic being what it is today, sometimes they can't. And they're all from the old school. They want to make their payment, and so I tell them, don't worry about it. Just let me know when it's coming up and call my office, and then whatever day it might be, then I'll run up there and pick it up. And I'm not saying I'm better than anybody else. It's just that I still feel very connected to people that have been with me for a while, and sometimes they can't get around. The traffic is terrible in some parts of El Paso, and you well know this.
It's interesting talking with you, Mike, because I've known you for for a large part of my life, and I've seen you build a very good business and stay with it. I've seen a lot of people not stay with certain things and change around. It's been hard for me too, but you stayed with it, and now you're serving the community in a very big way. You've got experience and you've got maturity in business and in your public service. So what would you say to someone who's out there trying to start something up? What would you say to them?
One of the things that startup businesses, or young men or young ladies, oftentimes they're not privy to the guidance. You run a business, and you have to look at, as you come in, look at it as a business. And I say this, sometimes they look at it with, oh, I see someone making gobs of money. But internally, have you considered your expenses? Have you considered your salaries? Have you considered your taxes? Have you considered your insurance? Okay, have you considered the day in and day out expenses your gasoline, the utilities, and on and on. And when I've had the opportunity of somebody walking in, I literally sit down. I have a very small office. I'm not, nothing grand at all. And I have a board that I put up there, and I sit out on that board and I make a list. And I say, this is what you need to look at. And if the leadership is not giving it to you, I'm giving it to you right now free. So make sure that those expenses that they want you to initiate are going to be covered through the income. And you'd be amazed sometimes. The grass is always greener on the other side.
See, what fascinates me is you know, in my profession, I'm a business coach. I work with small business to build a business.
Mm-hmm.
But you didn't have a coach. You had good mentors.
Yeah. No, I believe me. If I were to sit with you and tell you the truth, I've made a lot of mistakes. I've
Really?
made a tremendous amount of mistakes.
Really? Like what
I've
kind?
learned a lot.
What kind of mistake would you make? My gosh.
Oh, I wish you wouldn't ask me that one, but sometimes sometimes you and I'm a salesman. Sometimes in many ways I'm a sucker for these the list. You're going to get leads, and so you buy these things. Well, if you're not careful, the first thing they want is your credit card, and they give you the list, and then they start knocking down your credit card each month, and then to get away from some of those guys, it's tough. I know I've been tattooed on a couple of issues where about $700 was lost.
Wow.
Yeah. So you have to be careful, and I think my staff is now, they've been with me for so long, that oftentimes they're the ones that, whoa, what is it that you're going to get into, Dad, or what is it, Mr. Rosales? I have a staff of Melinda Carrasco that's been with me since I became. Then I brought my son, Michael, Robert, and then I have a young lady by the name of Selena Ahumada, and then my other young daughter is Margaret. And between those four of them, they sometimes I get excited, and they'll come back, no, do we really want to do this?
So is it your eyes get bigger than your common sense?
Well, you know, you just when you're a fighter, there's always something to accomplish, so to speak.
So as successful as you are, you've got to kind of have to be due diligence, or
Yes, absolutely. I'll give you an example. I had and I share this with you because it was a learning experience. I left State Farm and I had my 401k. When I became an agent, I could move it and sort of manage it, which I did through an affiliate of State Farm. But when I got into it, I didn't know. I'd been in the business for a long time, but that type of business I was unfamiliar with. So I don't recommend it, but I started to learn how to move from one fund to another, and was not afraid of it. And the biggest thing that happens in things like that, people are afraid because they heard the compadre lose the money because the compadre never checked into it. Well, the more I got into it, the more I began to understand. And I was fortunate enough, in 10 years, I doubled it.
Wow.
Yeah. Now, I'm not here to brag on it. I'm just saying it was a learning process for me because I didn't know, like many of you out there, what do I do with my 401k? I went to the company. Well, the way the rules are, no one can tell you what to do. You have to select, and when you're forced to select, you don't know what to select.
Yeah.
But those are the rules of the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission, and it's a toughie. And I learned those things. I learned also the fact that oftentimes you may run into someone that is really wanting to, let's say, team up with you. Be careful. Be careful because you want to make sure. I actually, through the course of time, I've never had partnerships.
That's a decision you made.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because you've seen partnerships.
I've seen plenty of them where they go this way. They came in this way, and something happened, and then you have a problem. So. And please, I want to make sure that the public understands I'm not a guru. I just have been at this thing long enough, but my desire to help the public is far exceeds anything that I've ever have done. And I don't consider myself a success at all, honestly. And I'm being very honest with you, brutally honest with you.
But you've survived.
I'm a survivor.
Yeah.
I'm a survivor.
And that's
Because I'm afraid to go back to where I came from.
okay.
In the beginning. Now, I'm not saying that my dad and my mom kept us in poverty. No, they were working people, they were working class, but they were they lived a very controlled life.
Limited.
Yeah, there were always limits. Your shoes, you take off those shoes and use the other ones. And many of us, thousands of us, live that way, and I understand that. But the more successful you become, or the more money you have available, the more you become, well, why worry about it? Well, you never know. You never know what's coming up the cycle of life. I call it that cycle.
So you've always been preparing.
Yeah, I guess going back to my mom, yeah. I don't want to be caught unprepared. I don't want to be in a position. I always tell my children, don't ever leave yourself in a corner. Don't ever work your way in a position where you're in a corner. You always have to have something that you can pay off or get you out of that trouble situation.
Very good. Well, very good advice. Mike, it's been tremendous hearing your story and having you share your story.
I've shared
with
a
us.
lot, yeah, and I hope it's it's accepted in the right, in the spirit that I've given it.
Yeah, no, it's very giving that you share with us, and you serve this community as a school board member at Isleta. Really appreciate that service, and the maturity you bring to the industry, your industry of independent insurance agents. Well, you're with State Farm.
I'm a captive agent.
Yeah, but I really appreciate that, Mike. Thank you so much for sharing your story, and I trust that our viewers enjoyed this story. I'm sure they did. I did. And I hope you enjoyed it, Mike.
It's been a real pleasure. I hope I didn't step on anyone's shoes. I just want to be very open, honest, and hopefully the few words that I gave will help someone that is looking and searching for that opportunity in this country. This country is so great. Let me just touch on that. The military, to me, just opened up my eyes. There's no other place like this place. Where in the world can you have an opportunity like this?
Yeah.
And we don't want to jeopardize it.
Yeah, that's great.
We don't want to jeopardize it. One of the things that I wish we could do is have people in the in civilian life serve at least 2 years in the military. Not because we want you to go into combat, not because of any of that. Just understand the wonderful country that this place is.
Well, fantastic. Well said. Thank you so much, Mike.
Thank you, Matt. I appreciate you
that.
allowing me to be here. It's a real pleasure.
And thank you for watching, and have a good day. Stay tuned. Good day.